Good morning, Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing to study the book of Amos, and we're right in the middle of the five images that God gives to the prophet in this next to last section of the book of Amos. And these first three, as well as the fourth, they're introduced by the phrase, "The Lord God showed me," and "Look, God showed me, and I'm showing you." And the first three, God sends judgment in the form of a locust plague, and the prophet says, "Please relent." And God says, "Okay, I'll relent." And in the second, he sends fire to consume the water and then the farmland. "Please relent." God relents. And then in the third, which we talked about last time, um, there's the plumb line that illustrates to the prophet, this can't be fixed. I have to destroy this nation. It cannot be fixed. And now we have in verse 10, it is the prophecy of the plumb line and the specific phrase, "I will rise up against the house of Jeroboam with the sword." He is the sitting king. This nobody from Judah has come up and riveted the crowds with his prophecies, and he said this. It's such a brave thing to do. And we have this narrative section in verses 10 through 17 about the confrontation between Amos and Amaziah. And it really pins us historically to a place and a time and reminds us that he wasn't writing this to be stuck in a library, and he wasn't in a room by himself with an oil lamp. He's delivering these prophecies in the streets, and it's electrifying the people who are listening to them, and they have to respond, and Amaziah is now responding. Amaziah, who's got the word Yahweh in his name, seems not to be a priest of Yahweh at all. So let's read verses 10 through 17. Then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent word to Jeroboam, the king of Israel, saying, "Amos has conspired against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is unable to endure all his words." This is how well known the prophecies are. He's doing it in the marketplaces, and everybody's hearing, and it's having its effect. No one's able to endure this. "For thus says Amos, Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will certainly go from its land into exile." Well, they've listened to him, because that's exactly what he said. So he writes the letter off to Jeroboam, and then he confronts Amos. Amos, Amaziah said to Amos, "Go, you seer, flee away to the land of Judah, and there eat bread, and there do your prophesying. But no longer prophesy at Bethel, for it is the sanctuary of the king and a royal residence." Then Amos answered and said to Amaziah, "I am not a prophet, nor am I the son of a prophet. I am a herdsman and a grower of sycamore figs. But Yahweh took me from following the flock, and Yahweh said to me, 'Go prophesy to my people Israel.'" That possessive pronoun. There's so much love. There's so much invested in it. There's so much disappointment in it. Prophesy to and connection in it. "Go prophesy to my people Israel, and now hear the word of Yahweh. You are saying, 'You shall not prophesy against Israel, nor shall you speak against the house of Isaac.' Therefore, thus says Yahweh." It's harsh, and it may have literally come true. "Your wife will become a harlot in the city. Your sons and daughters will fall by the sword. Your land will be parceled up by a measuring line, and you yourself will die upon unclean soil. Moreover, Israel will certainly go from its land into exile." Okay, well, Amaziah is the priest of Bethel. He's not a priest of Yahweh. Bethel is the center of the bull cult that Jeroboam the first established when he established the northern kingdom. It's a primary site of the worship of the bull cult. And it's also evidently a city that is, during some times of the year, a royal residence. Jeroboam, too, has a palace in Bethel as well. And therefore, he's probably close by. This was a note that would have gotten to him quite quickly. Amaziah says to Amos, "Run away. I've told the king on you. Run away." He calls him a seer. That's one of the words in the Old Testament that's used for prophecy, for a prophet. Nabi is the word for prophet, and he is doing prophecy. The verb form of that word is there. Go back home to Judah and do your prophesying. But he calls him a seer. That's the ancient word, and it's so old that it has to be explained in the book of First Samuel, because Samuel is called a seer, a roe, someone who has vision, who has godly sight, and he is indeed a visionary, one with godly sight, because he just has been describing the things that God has showed him that he's showing us. So it is an accurate name, but it is probably being used derisively. He's probably calling him a hick, you know? He's probably saying to him, "Go back home. You're nobody. Go back to Judah." Um, he's not denying the fact that he has a gift of prophecy, but he's telling him to go home. And Amos is such a humble guy. I'm not a prophet. You're right. I'm not a prophet, and I'm not the son of a prophet, but Yahweh called me from the flocks. I am a shepherd, and I'm a farmer of sycamore figs. The sycamore fig tree, the fig tree that is found in this area, is not native to this area, and until it developed, it had to be tended. It's from Central Africa. It came to Palestine by way of Egypt. It was a fairly new addition within the century or two to the staple crops of the area. The pollinators that this tree had in Central Africa did not exist in Palestine, and therefore the sycamore fig at this time had to be pollinated by hand. And the fruit, in order to fully ripen, had to be pierced in just the right way, at just the right place, and the right time to encourage it to continue to ripen in the more arid climate of Palestine. And so it had to be farmed. It's not just a matter of waiting for the apples to be ready to be picked off the tree. They had to be tended because they were not native to that microclimate. And that's what he was doing. But God called me and I was obedient. So let me tell you what's going to happen to you, Amaziah, you personally. Everything else that he mentions is literal. You're going to die in exile. You're going to die on foreign soil, unclean soil. I'm sure that he did. You're going to be hauled away. If he's the priest at Bethel, he's probably the leading priest of the bull cult and a very important man in in the northern kingdom. He says your sons and daughters are going to fall by the sword. I'm sure they did. He said your land is going to be parceled up by a measuring line, referring back to the plumb line a little bit. I'm sure that happened too. So your wife becoming a harlot. If this is a younger man with children, if his sons and daughters are children, they would not have probably been carried away by the Assyrians. They would have been killed by the Assyrians. Probably he would have been made to watch them be killed. And his wife becoming a harlot, um, in ancient times to this day. Just read the newspapers about Hamas in Israel and about the Israeli army in Gaza. Women are considered the spoils of war, even though it's illegal. They always are. If you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, particularly the Iliad, you know that the great spoil of war is to take the wife of the great man and make her your concubine or to use her in some way. I mean, that happens over and over again in the Iliad. It was practiced in ancient times. The Iliad, the Trojan War, is happening about this very time in history, um, in the 7th century, 8th century, maybe a little earlier, but but the songs are being sung clearly at this time in the 7th century, um, and I have no doubt that's literal as well. Okay, we're going to look at the basket of summer fruit next time, and then revisit their social injustice in chapter 8. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.